The deep night enveloped the world around me as I sat on the couch, lost in my thoughts, staring at the envelope I unexpectedly found in my mailbox. Though the couch was soft, it felt hard at that moment, as if it were made of concrete. That's how tense I was. The reason for my tension was the sender of the letter, my grandfather, whom I hadn't communicated with for a long time. Deep down, I felt doubts and fears, hindering me from tearing open the thick paper of the envelope. Yet my hands, as if separate entities from me, nervously clutched it. Overcoming the moment of hesitation, I stood up, carefully placed the letter on the table, and headed to the kitchen. I needed a drink. Opening the fridge, I found it almost empty, except for a couple of beer cans. I need to go shopping, a thought flashed through my mind. With a characteristic hiss, I opened one of the cans and drank it in one gulp, then took the second one and returned to the living room with it in my hand. The light in the house was bright, but the air felt filled with anxiety and an inevitable anticipation of some news that the letter was supposed to bring. Setting aside the beer, I finally mustered the courage and unfolded the envelope. Inside awaited an invitation from my grandfather to visit him at his country house for his 80th birthday. The message was succinct, without extra words, questions, or wishes. After rereading it several times and confirming that there was no other content there, I crumpled the paper and threw it away. Sinking back onto the couch, I sighed deeply and delved into my thoughts. What could have prompted my grandfather to invite me? What does he expect from our meeting? Perhaps he sensed the approach of the end and wanted to leave me something important as a legacy. Various conjectures and assumptions about the upcoming meeting began to form in my mind. Despite my grandfather's immense wealth, I had never thirsted for his riches. Suddenly, the rain starting outside seemed to underscore my inner melancholy. Inspired by the moment, I got up and approached the table to pick up an old photograph. It depicted a young boy and a woman, mother and son, radiating sincere happiness. As if echoing my contemplations, the phone suddenly rang. Glancing at the display confirmed my suspicions. It was John, my one true friend. We had met while working at the local factory, and since then we had maintained a strong bond, especially after the recent loss of my father, leaving only him by my side. I answered the call. "Hello, John?" I began. "David!" he exclaimed enthusiastically in response, his voice sounding as if his mood today was particularly uplifted. "How are you, buddy? Did you miss me? Although we haven't seen each other for just a day, you missed me, right? And you know who else missed you, and it's not me. Imagine. Remember Sarah from Demi's Diner? She said she wouldn't mind going to the movies with her friend and inviting us. So are you interested?" "Wait," I tried to stop him, as if trying to dam the verbal waterfall. "Maybe another time." I told him about the unexpected letter from my grandfather. John listened attentively to my story, then declared that he would be with me soon. Approximately 10 minutes later, the front door opened and John appeared on the threshold with a pack of beer. He took out a couple of cans, handed one to me, sat down on the couch, and asked me to tell him more. After my brief explanation, he didn't conceal his surprise. "So you mean to tell me you have a grandfather on your mother's side whom you haven't communicated with for years, and he suddenly invites you over? And moreover, he's incredibly wealthy?" I just nodded in response. Then John, full of enthusiasm, jumped up and exclaimed, "There's no need to think, buddy. You should go. Befriend your grandfather. And there's your fortune. You won't have to work at that factory anymore. My eyes are already shining at the thought of your wealth. If anything, I'm with you. We'll take a day off and have a blast at your grandfather's place." My doubts were understandable. John spoke about it lightly because he didn't know my grandfather personally. However, curiosity outweighed in me. I wanted to find out why my grandfather decided to reach out to me after all these years of silence. So, despite my hesitations, the decision was made to go to my grandfather. John and I spent a couple more hours enjoying beer and conversation, then agreed that the day after tomorrow we would set off together. When my friend left, the house fell silent. Left alone with my thoughts and anticipation of the upcoming adventure, I decided it was time to rest. As I lay in bed, I slowly drifted into sleep, pondering the upcoming meeting with my grandfather. Questions and conjectures swirled in my mind about what he might say to me and how this meeting would affect my future. The night promised to be restless, full of dreams and anticipation of the new day. John arrived at dawn, as the first rays of sunlight were barely breaking through the morning mist. His old, weathered Ford pickup truck was ready for the long journey we had planned. The day before, we managed to persuade our boss to give us a couple of days off. He looked at us with a hint of disapproval, yet still agreed. Thanks to our diligent work and the absence of problems on our part, he compromised. We gathered our things easily. Neatly packed suits for the meeting were lying in the suitcase, and we also took a small supply of food for the road and a couple of cans of cola. We needed to drive to the neighboring state, and if we needed anything, we could purchase it along the way. The morning was still early, and many neighbors likely hadn't woken up yet when I, yawning, transferred the suitcase to the back seat of the pickup truck. After making sure everything at home was turned off and locked, I got into the car. The vehicle roared to life with a loud rumble, thanks to a special muffler that John installed to mimic the sound of a semi-truck. Guiltily, I glanced around, thinking that surely this noise had awakened everyone in the neighborhood. John confidently pressed the gas, and we set off heading towards the highway. The road traversed through changing landscapes, starting from dense forests, the greenery of which contrasted vividly with the gray asphalt, to open fields where the first rays of sunlight playfully reflected off dewdrops, resembling millions of tiny stars fallen to earth. We passed through small towns, each with its unique architecture and character, where morning life was just beginning to stir. People rushed to work, the first cafes opened, and more cars appeared on the roads. Opening the window, I felt a pleasant, warm breeze on my face. In the silence, interrupted only by the noise of the road, my thoughts turned to the upcoming meeting. Involuntarily, they carried me far into the past, to one of the biggest mysteries and tragedies of my life, the disappearance of my mother. I was only 10 years old when she vanished without a trace. All efforts to find her proved futile. There was a theory that she might have gotten lost in the woods or even fallen victim to a wild animal, but no evidence was ever found. This event forever changed our family, leaving a deep scar on my father's heart. At first, he tried to numb the pain with alcohol, but then he gathered his strength and single-handedly raised me. I can't say that my life was perfect, but neither was it entirely unhappy. I also longed for my mother, especially when my father sent me to my grandfather's for the summer. Those visits left me with not the warmest memories, as my grandfather hardly interacted with me, leaving me alone in his city house. Although he had another house outside the city, I had never been there. Lost in thoughts of the past, I didn't notice how time flew by. We crossed the state border, and soon we were supposed to arrive in the town where my grandfather lived. Arriving in the designated town, we immediately felt its provincial spirit. A place where life flowed in its measured rhythm, where everyone knew everyone and news spread astonishingly fast. This small American town resembled scenes from movies about old-fashioned America, where on the main street, stores had been operating for decades under the same sign, and familiar faces could always be encountered at intersections. Deciding to grab a bite, we headed to a local diner, which seemed like the perfect place not only for lunch, but also to gather the necessary information. The diner was exactly like something out of the cult movie Pulp Fiction, with its unique atmosphere and the spirit of old America. In the parking lot, there were a couple of chrome bikes and several cars, adding a special flavor to the place. Approaching the cafe, we entered inside and immediately found a cozy table. Before we could settle in, the waitress approached us. She was a middle-aged woman with a friendly face and a welcoming smile, dressed in a cute apron. Her name tag proudly displayed the name Becky. With warmth in her gaze, she handed us the menus. I ordered toast with coffee, preferring to start the day with a classic and simple breakfast, while John chose scrambled eggs. Both of us were geared towards pleasant conversation and a tasty lunch as we observed our surroundings, trying to absorb the atmosphere of this small town and its inhabitants. Around us there was an atmosphere of tranquility and homely comfort, so characteristic of small American towns where each day resembled the previous one, and small joys became noticeable and significant. The waitress took our order and was about to leave when John asked her, "Could you please tell us how to get to Mr. Fletcher's country house?" The waitress replied, "Oh, perhaps you're invited to his event. Let me show you," she said enthusiastically, pulling out her smartphone. A map quickly appeared on the screen with the location precisely marked. "It's not far, about half an hour's drive from here. I envy you being invited. Mr. Fletcher is quite a celebrity in our town. Surely, all the most important people from our town will be there. Are you related to him in any way?" "Yes, he's his grandson," John blurted out, pointing at me. "Really? Your grandfather is a wonderful person. He's done so much for our town. You know, we have a shelter for the homeless, and he fully funded its repair, not to mention his generous donations to the town treasury. And in winter, he dresses up as Santa Claus and visits the homes of the needy, bringing them joy. Yes, he's done so much good. You should be proud of your grandfather, young man." Awkwardly scratching my nose and nodding slightly, I felt uncomfortable with the sudden attention on me. At that moment, 2 police officers entered the diner. The first, a man of about 45 with flecks of gray in his hair, was a man of short stature with a kindly expression on his face. His companion, likely a younger assistant, looked about 30, with chestnut curls and a face dotted with freckles. Becky went over to them with a warm smile. "Hello, Becky. As usual," the first man who entered said. "Why do you both look so concerned today? Has something happened?" Becky asked with curiosity. "People are disappearing again in neighboring towns. The sheriff's requested our help in the search. Thank God everything's quiet here for now." We couldn't help but listen. "Oh my God, how many people have gone missing already? I heard this wave of disappearances started just a week ago." Disappearances have happened before, but this time, within a short period, 10 people have gone missing, and all of them were of a fairly advanced age, the sheriff replied, taking off his hat and sitting down. "I have a feeling something sinister is looming." Becky nodded with concern and went to fulfill the order. John and I exchanged glances, after which he quietly asked, "Listen, you said your grandfather was a pretty tough guy. How come everyone speaks so highly of him?" I didn't answer. After all, it was my grandfather's two-faced behavior that caused my negative attitude towards him. It seemed that only I and his personal assistant, who worked for him at home, knew about it. In the presence of others, my grandfather always showed friendliness. But as soon as they left, he dropped the mask and revealed his true face. grim and full of malice. This transformation was terrifying, and what's worse, he never tried to hide it from me. After lunch, we continued our journey. The road to my grandfather's country house passed without any special events. Passing through this typical provincial town, which didn't particularly interest us, we finally arrived at our destination. Pulling up to the house, we noticed several cars already parked opposite. Leaving our car, we got out and surveyed the area. John even whistled with surprise and admiration. Before us stood a huge 3-story mansion, as if taken from a book about magnificent architectural masterpieces. The building, adorned with intricate stone carvings and decorative elements, impressed with its size and nobility. Its facade, painted in warm pastel tones, harmoniously blended into the surrounding landscape. Large panoramic windows on each floor allowed daylight to penetrate freely inside, giving the building a special charm and coziness. Around the mansion was a neatly trimmed lawn, on which elegant bushes and flower beds were arranged as if by a ruler, adorned with a variety of flowers and decorative plants. Compositions of greenery and flowers created a cozy and pleasant atmosphere, while winding paths invited you deeper into the garden, promising even more discoveries and beauty. We stood for a few moments, enjoying the view and grandeur of the place, before heading towards the mansion's front door. As soon as we raised our hand to knock, the door swung open instantly. Standing in the doorway was a woman about 40 years old, dressed in an elegant black, gray, and white dress. Her appearance was far from traditional standards of beauty, and her facial expression seemed distinctly unfriendly, giving her a sinister look. Her not too long hair was neatly gathered in a bun at the nape. It was Miss Olson, my grandfather's manager and personal assistant. I didn't know exactly how many years she had worked in this position, but I remembered her from my childhood when I used to visit my grandfather. Her stern, gloomy face hadn't changed since then, which only reinforced my impression of her. Unlike my grandfather, Miss Olson never tried to hide her true attitude towards others, which, in my opinion, made her a more sincere person. Her gaze slid over me, and she commented without a smile, "You've grown, David, but haven't gained any beauty." Then her attention shifted to John, and she added sharply, "And who's this? We certainly didn't invite him." "This is John, my friend. He's with me as a +1, I said, smiling in response to John's surprised look. Miss Olson paused for a moment, assessing the situation, then silently led us inside. Entering the house, we found ourselves in a luxurious hall, its walls adorned with exquisite paintings, while stately vases towered in the corners of the room. John looked around with delight and curiosity, not missing the opportunity to nudge me in the side and whisper in my ear that I supposedly hit the jackpot. Eventually, we were led to 2 adjacent rooms. Stepping into one of them, I found a cozy bedroom with a spacious bed flanked by bedside tables. Opposite the bed stood an imposing chest of drawers, completing the room's decor. "Make yourselves comfortable. The reception will start at 6 in the evening. I'll come and let you know. For now, just stay here," said the manager. "Wait, what about the meeting with grandfather?" "He's busy right now, so settle in for now. You'll talk to him in the evening." We nodded in agreement. John headed to his room, and I, opening my suitcase, pulled out an old suit inherited from my father. After that, I opened the chest of drawers, where I found everything I needed to iron my clothes. Carefully ironing the suit, I hung it up neatly and then lay down on the bed, contemplating the upcoming evening. Thoughts enveloped my consciousness, and I didn't even notice when I drifted off to sleep. In my dream, I returned to my childhood when I was 10 years old. I twirled around my mom, pleading with her for something with childish persistence. "Mom, let's go for a walk. I want to explore the forest again." "No, son, it's too late. What if we get lost?" I continued to beg her, constantly tugging at her long white dress, and eventually she agreed. After a while, we stood in front of the forest, and as I tried to enter it, someone knocked heavily on the door. "Young master, it's time to go. The dinner party will start soon." I woke up. Before me was a gray ceiling and an elegant chandelier. My heart was pounding wildly. Was it a dream or a memory? Trying to figure it out, I felt a sharp headache. Rubbing my eyes, I headed to the bathroom, freshened up, and, putting on my suit, went down to the hall. There, John was already waiting for me, elegantly dressed with a bow tie around his neck. His unusual look for him tried to bring a smile to my face, but my heart continued to beat furiously. Descending downstairs, we found ourselves in the main hall, where a multitude of guests had already gathered. The spacious room impressed with its magnificence. High ceilings supported luxurious chandeliers emitting warm light, which softly illuminated the entire hall. The walls were adorned with exquisite paintings and draperies, giving the interior a special charm and nobility. In the center of the hall stood an elegant stage for performances, surrounded by rows of neatly arranged tables with stylish table settings. We walked past the guests, not knowing anyone, but politely nodding in response to their greetings. Miss Olson had disappeared, busy with her own affairs, and we headed to the buffet table. Treating myself to light snacks, I washed it down with a glass of champagne. John and I stood there for a while, observing the proceedings. When my grandfather entered the hall, everyone's attention immediately focused on him. It had been a long time since our last meeting, and I immediately noticed how he had changed. Once full of strength and health, his face now seemed tired and weakened. Nevertheless, his smile remained unchanged, warmly greeting everyone. His entrance was greeted with welcoming applause, to which he waved his hand shyly, as if to say, "This wasn't necessary for me," and proceeded to the center of the hall. There, he was awaited by a man in an elegant suit, who warmly welcomed my grandfather, and began to speak. "Dear guests, today we have gathered here to pay tribute to our dear friend, the honorable citizen of our city, the inspiration and unsurpassed generous soul of our society," he began, then paused and applauded before continuing. "Let us express our best wishes for his longevity. And as the mayor of our city, I am pleased to present him with an award for his outstanding merits." After these words, he was handed an exquisite red box, from which he took out a beautiful medal and carefully pinned it to my grandfather's chest. Then he raised his glass and drank, inviting all present to follow his example. After my grandfather drank the champagne and surveyed the guests, he spoke. "Thank you for sharing this event with me and for your acknowledgement." At that moment, his gaze fell on me. I noticed a fleeting disappearance of the smile from his face, but soon it returned as he beckoned me to him. With some reluctance, I approached my grandfather, feeling the attention of everyone present. "Today, I want to share some news with you all. My years are coming to an end, and I have little time left. That's why I've decided to pass on all my inheritance to my only relative, my grandson." I stood rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of what I had just heard, when I heard hesitant applause. Turning around, I noticed John starting to clap, winking at me and gesturing, "It's all good." Soon, other guests joined in with applause, creating a wave of enthusiastic claps. My eyes met my grandfather's. He touched my arm and quietly said we would discuss everything later, then raised his glass and walked over to the mayor, Returning to John, I tried to gather my thoughts. The evening continued. Different people approached, congratulating me, wishing my grandfather well. And I, nodding gratefully, couldn't take my eyes off my grandfather, pondering his intentions. As the event came to an end and the guests began to disperse, my grandfather disappeared somewhere with the mayor. Miss Olson approached us and escorted us back to our rooms. I never had the opportunity to talk to my grandfather. After washing up and changing clothes, I lay down in bed. It didn't take long before I fell asleep. I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, feeling as if the air in my lungs had turned to lead and my body refused to obey. Complete helplessness and engulfing fear made even the slightest movement impossible. The silence around me was so absolute it felt tangible. Suddenly I felt an inexplicable pressure on my legs, slowly but surely moving and settling between them. My heart pounded wildly. I attempted to sit up to see the cause of my fear, hoping it was just John playing a prank. However, in the darkness I could only make out a vague outline at my feet. At first, I thought it was a dog, but then I realized it couldn't be. The creature was too large. Fear made me lie back down, paralyzed by the thought that any movement could be fatal. After what felt like an eternity, the mysterious creature stood up, and my eyes, accustomed to the darkness, could discern its silhouette. It was a gaunt and contorted creature, reminiscent of aliens from the movie Signs with Mel Gibson. It slowly walked to the door and disappeared behind it. My heart raced insanely. I struggled to regain control of my paralyzed body. Gradually, I managed to calm my breathing, and trying not to make a sound, I got up to check on John. I went out into the hallway, where complete darkness reigned, and illuminated the path with the flashlight on my phone. I tried to turn on the lights, but the house seemed to be without power. Under the flashlight's beam, I headed to John's room, my heart pounding as I opened the door. To my surprise and alarm, the room was empty. John was gone. Questions swirled in my head. What had happened? Where could John have gone? Remembering that creature, I felt that we were in trouble. Deciding to search the house for my friend, I continued down the hallway and stumbled upon the door to the garbage chute. Easily pushing it open, I saw a square shaft descending into the depths of the building. Recoiling, I moved on and began opening doors along the way. Behind them were bedrooms and closets, but they were empty. Continuing my journey, I reached the door at the end of the corridor. Opening it, I discovered a small laundry room with shelves filled with bedding and blankets along the walls. Illuminating the center of the room with my flashlight, I saw a washing machine covered in blood, from which a bloody stream flowed onto the floor. My hand trembled. I felt that something was on the machine, and despite the fear, I slowly raised the flashlight. A disgusting and terrifying creature covered in fur with long hair and a muzzle resembling a hyena stared back at me. Its long claws were the size of an adult man's index finger, and a row of sharp small teeth adorned its mouth. The creature had a long, thin tail with a tuft at the end, which it slowly wagged. Its eyes gleamed, sending shivers down my spine. I felt like I'd lost the ability to think. My legs became weak. It was the most horrible creature I'd ever seen. Suddenly it bared its teeth and growled, then crouched, preparing to pounce. I managed to close the door before it leaped at me, beginning to beat against the door. I stood still for a moment and then fled. As I ran from the creature, I heard it crash against the door with a destructive roar. Realizing that my chances of escaping were slim, I remembered the door to the shaft. Speeding up, I soon found it, desperately squeezing inside, and suddenly found myself falling. I thought the end was inevitable, but suddenly the corner of the shaft changed, and I flew out into a room. Looking around, I noticed my phone had flown several meters away from me. Crawling over to it and illuminating the room, I realized I was in a windowless basement. The room was empty, but the walls were marred with scratches. Obviously, the creature had lived here. I hurried to leave to avoid a possible encounter with the monster, soon finding a door which fortunately was not locked. Exiting the room, I found myself in a corridor resembling catacombs with low ceilings and narrow passages illuminated by red lanterns. Choosing between directions, I felt a fresh draft from the left and headed in that direction. The corridor gradually widened, leading me into a large oval room. In its center stood a stone slab resembling a bed all covered in blood. Next to it was a chain with a collar at one end. Illuminating the surrounding space with my flashlight, I shuddered in horror, seeing a severed human finger. Sweat poured from me, my heart pounded like crazy. And then in the distance I heard a knock. Thud, thud, thud. Overwhelmed with fear, I decided it was time to make a run for it. Finding a passage on the opposite side, I hurried towards it. Soon I came across a door, which fortunately was unlocked. Entering inside, I discovered a monitoring room equipped with a control panel and multiple screens hanging on the walls. Examining the contents of the screens, I noticed that the main one showed the room with the stone slab, while the others displayed footage from multiple cameras, showing seemingly elderly people lying apathetically in their beds. A shiver ran down my spine when I recognized John in one of the chambers. We needed to free him immediately and get out of this place. Thinking about calling the police, I glanced at my phone, which had no signal, probably because we were deep underground. Looking around for keys, I found a bunch hanging on a nail by the door. There was also a low cabinet in the room, where I found a pistol. Checking the safety, I tucked it into my waistband and left the room, heading down the corridor. Soon I encountered the doors of the dungeons, each with a small window with bars. Approaching one after another, I noticed the inhabitants of these dungeons, upon seeing me, started to cry out for help. All I could do was apologize and promise to return with assistance. Finally, I found John, who was in a semi-conscious state on the bed. Opening the door and hearing a familiar knock in the distance, I hurried, woke up my friend, and helped him stand, draping his arm over my shoulder. As we prepared to leave the dungeon, the creature suddenly appeared before us. Slowly backing away, I quietly closed the door behind me, laid John back on the bed, and peeked outside. The creature, roughly stepping, held someone's hand in its teeth, which swung in rhythm with its movements. Saliva mixed with blood dripped from its mouth. In its hand was a human leg with an iron ring around the ankle, presumably used to restrain victims before feeding them to the monster. The monster kept waving its leg, banging it against the walls, creating that ominous knocking sound. Entering the room, the creature began to look around. All the dungeon's inhabitants suddenly froze, and it became eerily quiet. I slid down and hid as well, waiting to see what would happen next. Locking the door, I retreated to the corner, barely allowing myself to breathe, while outside there were menacing rumblings and growls. The thought of recent disappearances of people in neighboring towns flashed through my mind. A chill ran down my spine at the thought that my grandfather could be involved in their abductions, feeding them to this horrifying creature. Suddenly, silence fell. Maybe the creature had left? Carefully rising, I peered out the little window in the door. Before I could take a good look around, the monster's face appeared inches from mine, enveloping me in waves of the stench of blood. Its cold eyes pierced into me, seeing me only as prey. I recoiled as the creature grabbed the bars with force, trying to break in. Thanks to the lock, the door withstood the pressure, and eventually the monster retreated. My heart was pounding wildly, but I dared to look outside again and saw the creature returning to the ominous room with the stone slab. This could be our chance to escape. Carefully helping John, who was beginning to regain consciousness, we left the chamber and started moving towards the opposite exit. Before us stretched a narrow corridor, at the end of which loomed a staircase. Hope flared up in us with renewed strength, and we hastened our steps. Climbing the stairs, we encountered a door. I had a bunch of keys, and I began feverishly trying them one by one. Desperation grew with each new key, but when I picked up the last one, my hands were trembling. Turning it, I heard the satisfying click. The door opened. We rushed into the corridor, checking each door on the way. One led to a pantry, another to a lounge area. Continuing towards the exit, we almost reached it when a familiar voice stopped us. "Wait, young man, it's too early for you to leave," came from behind. Turning around, we saw Miss Olson. In her hands was a shotgun aimed at us. "Your grandfather is waiting for you. He wants to talk to you. Please, follow me." With no other choice, we followed Miss Olson. Exiting the room, we found ourselves in the kitchen, which looked entirely ordinary. Then our path led through the hallway, and we climbed to the second floor. Before us was an imposing door, the entrance to my grandfather's office. Miss Olson knocked and invited us in. Inside awaited a spacious room, filled with bookcases and a large writing desk by the window, behind which sat my grandfather, engrossed in reading and enjoying a cigar. Approaching the desk, we drew his attention, and he, setting aside his book and extinguishing his cigar, slowly raised his gaze to us, an expression far from warmth on his face. "Well, grandson," he began, "it seems you have already realized that inheritance brings not only wealth but also problems. Taking care of that creature is now your responsibility too." My words burst out in a fit of anger. "Are you out of your mind? Why did you lock up John? Wanted to feed him to that monster?" The smug smile on his face only fueled my rage. "You're abducting people and feeding them to this monster. Are you insane? What is going on here?" he replied. I had no choice. As you probably noticed, they were old people. I didn't feed the creature the young ones. But I still couldn't understand. Why? Why keep this creature in the basement? Grandfather's anger flared up instantly, his face contorted with malice, his eyes widened, and he screamed, "It's all because of you! It's all your fault!" I fell silent, lost in speculation about what I could have done wrong. Grandfather wanted to continue, but suddenly there was a loud noise from behind the door. Miss Olson exclaimed worriedly, "Sir, the creature has broken free. We need to do something to catch it." Grandfather chuckled knowingly, stood up, went to the cabinet and opened it. Inside lay a shotgun and a row of tranquilizer darts. He took the shotgun, loaded it, and headed outside, leaving us with Miss Olson. After some time, when the noise subsided, Grandfather still hadn't returned. Looking at John, I saw the reflection of horror on his face. "What's happening? What do we do now?" His gaze seemed to be a question without an answer. Miss Olson decided to go outside to find out what had happened, leaving us in uncertainty. Time dragged on slowly, and she also didn't return. Eventually, deciding to find out what was going on, I opened the door and peeked outside, but found no one. Suddenly, a piercing scream filled the air. It was Miss Olson's voice. Her cries sounded desperate, filled with horror and pleas for help. Without hesitation, I dashed towards the screams, grabbing the pistol. John followed me. We burst into the living room, where a menacing sight awaited me. The creature held Miss Olson's head in one hand and her body in the other. My legs weakened with horror, but I forced myself to act. I aimed the gun at the monster and fired. The bullet hit its arm, causing it to release the body. With irritation, the creature threw the head in my direction and made a powerful leap. I continued to shoot until I hit its leg, causing it to lose grip and fall to the ground. Preparing for a final shot, I suddenly heard Grandfather's cry. Turning around, I saw him bloodied, lying by the cabinet. He shouted to me, "Stop! Don't kill her! It's your mother!" I stopped, stunned, and turned to him. "What? My mother?" The words choked in my throat as I tried to make sense of his words in this nightmare. At that moment, when the world around seemed chaotic, I suddenly felt a headache and plunged into memories. I remembered the day I asked my mother to go for a walk in the woods with me. We were happy, breathing in the freshness of the forest air until something stirred in the bushes. Out of them sprang a creature, attacking my mother. She screamed for me to run, and despite my despair and tears, I obeyed her. Returning from the forest, I told Grandfather what had happened, and he rushed to help, but returned with her bloodied body, declaring her dead and blaming me for it. Awakening from my memories, I saw the creature lunge at me again. Unable to decide whether to shoot, I froze, waiting for its attack, but John intervened in time, knocking me down as the creature flew past. The pistol slipped from my hands, and John, grabbing it, began shooting at the creature until it stopped moving. I lay in shock, trying to come to my senses. My whole world had turned upside down, and realization dawned on me. John approached and helped me up. Then we went to Grandfather, trying to administer first aid to him. But it was too late. He grabbed my hand and pulled me close, then looked into my eyes and said, "I loved my daughter, but she died because of your whim. Why? Why couldn't you just stay home?" After that, I heard a loud thud. John struck the dying man on the cheek and said, "You sick bastard! What was the child guilty of? Why did you keep this creature all this time? This is no longer his mother." The old man wanted to object, but he was out of strength. His eyes remained open, and I reached out and closed them. Then I took out my phone and called the police. After some time, the cops arrived. I led them and showed them the body. Instead of the creature, there lay the body of a young woman. I looked at her and recognized my mother. Joy and relief were written on her face. Perhaps she had been suffering all this time and finally found peace. I couldn't bear the sight. I turned away, sat down, and vomited. John approached and helped me up. We explained the situation to the policeman and led him to the dungeon. The captives were rescued. The house was surrounded by police, and after giving our statements, we were temporarily detained to clarify the circumstances. Released after a day, we finally were able to go home, leaving behind the nightmare of this house and its secrets.